My name is Yonthan Keren. I work as a group facilitator in the Encompass project. My daily work consists of facilitation. I teach a facilitation method called Deep Democracy, and I facilitate conflict and complex decision-making processes. And I mainly work in healthcare, education, in government, so municipalities, and then I also do work at let's say a more societal level, so large-scale conflict interventions, a bit like what we're doing at Encompass, but we'll be with larger groups of citizens that come and talk about societal conflicts. And I also work in the home, so with couples or families. Deep democracy is a method that was developed in South Africa in the early 90s during that transition from apartheid to democracy. And in those days, there was a need to help people make decisions in a more collaborative manner, bring in more minority voices that hadn't been heard for many years, and particularly also to deal with conflict. So that's kind of where this work grew, and now it turns out to be a very effective method to work with different opinions, tensions, and conflict, and then how to do decisions where you really include minority voices and not just sticking to majority rules. I came to this method because I was working in education, and I just had this deep interest in human relationships and understanding better what was happening in those groups in my classroom, particularly because I also understood that those relationships were so important in a learning process, like the real deep learning happens through relationships. So I actually came for that. And when Myrna Lewis, the founder of Deep Democracy, came to the Netherlands where I live, she talked about conflict in a very unusual way. And she talked about how positive conflict is, and that we grow when we go through conflicts together. And and I also experienced in those days that group that I was in, that we actually really had a good fight and we came out better. And I hadn't really experienced it that way. And in those days I was having lots of conflict. My background is my parents are Israeli. I was born in the States when they studied there. And then I grew up in the Netherlands because my dad just happened to get a job there. And in those days, and this was 2006 when I first learned Deep Democracy from Myrna, the founder. For me, when she talked about conflict as a positive thing and that experience, it was so new. I just went out and I tried this with everybody that was willing to go through a conflict with me, and that really transformed the way I experienced my relationships. It started lessening the conflict that I had internally and externally, and also the addiction that was so deeply entrenched in my system started to lessen, and it started to surface the underlying issues, the trauma and all the repression that was happening, and so I just had a better life, and that was a good reason to start doing this work with others and to share it with others. What we've done in those 2 days is, first of all, I've introduced Deep Democracy as a method to have conversations in which those viewpoints that are oftentimes hidden, the things that we don't say because they're unpopular, or they might rock the boat, or we're afraid to damage our relationships. So how to bring those voices up and how to include them in dialogue and in decision making. Really kind of how to create an environment in which we can allow more of the feelings and opinions to arise. We went through a Deep Democracy process. We practiced and looked at what was going on in this group. We kind of dove into it and really looked at what is happening right here between us. So the first conversation wasn't so much a political conversation. I mean, obviously the political aspect comes in, but it was about what's happening between us, and are we being real with each other, and how are our relationships developing and growing. And we did this first process around the tensions that were arising, and to surface those and really look at why are we opposing each other. And that was the first day. And then on the second day, oh, and what we also did is we looked at how to have tough conversations in dyads. So, if you have something difficult to discuss, or you have a conflict or a tension with someone, how do you structure a conversation so that you can actually really say what you have to say, that both parties can be honest and real about it and not kind of, pretend that everything is okay, but also come out on the other end, on the other side, feeling more connected, understanding what the source of the friction is, and de-escalating the tension. So that was day one, and on day two we had a more political debate. And in the morning there had been an attack in Hadera in Israel, and so it had triggered a lot of emotion. And so we had a conversation about, so where are we at now? We've gone through this process together, and now this is really bringing up a lot of stuff for us. So, and that really led us into having a really good fight. And that's what we do in Deep Democracy. We try not to soften the language and kind of sugarcoat things, but be very direct and real about it. And it's not that we just kind of jump into screaming at each other. We slowed down the process. We looked at what do we need to be safe or to feel safe, what ground rules do we need to set in order to be able to say what we have to say. And then we had a really good fight, and people said what they had on their mind in a very direct way, and then we looked at what that taught us. Like we really had a conversation around, so what were the things that hit you, and what did they uncover, what did they show you about yourself. So we did a conflict resolution process, and then and then in the afternoon we looked at this thing called the work of Byron Katie, which is a self-inquiry process. It's a way to identify and question stressful thoughts. And so it's a way to look at our judgments on others, on the world, on concepts, anything that would create stress in the form of disappointment, anger, fear, sadness. So how to identify the source of those feelings and question those, and really have a real understanding of our inner world and how the labels that we believe, these things that we believe about the world. It's a terrible world out there, and there's a war out there, and you are, dominant, and you are a bad listener, and you don't care about me, and all those thoughts that create pain and suffering in our lives. We looked at how to identify those and how to question them, and that was the program. It was incredible. To me, it was incredible to see these people work, and the wisdom that they brought, and these open minds and willingness to kind of go through these tough processes. I mean, it was a sight to behold. I was in awe of what happened there. Oh, wow. I mean, the when we checked out with the group, that was a really touching moment to me. Like I said, it was just very humbling to hear these people come in, and also I don't know what it is like to go through the things that this group goes through. I have a very privileged life. I live in Amsterdam. I have the privilege to live in peace and freedom. And the topics on these conversations were, people talked about their day-to-day reality, which is very different from mine, and so it was really humbling to be with this group and hear their experience and see and experience their resilience, and that despite all the things they go through, there's still a real willingness to connect with each other and to resolve this war. And so that was one thing that really struck me. Like, you know, who knows? I have no idea whether I would be willing or capable to do that if I were living in those circumstances. And then, you know, the conclusions that they came to, and there were a few things said that, yeah, just for me, they just showed how this ability and willingness to have a flexible mind, you know, to see possibilities outside, you know, our own conditioning, our own very old and stubborn beliefs. And I mean, I know what that's like because I know how stubborn that can be in me, you know, the holy pillars of how we look at the world. And so a few of the things that really touched me were one of the things in the checkouts that was said was, I realized that I learned as a man that I need to not show my emotion and push it down. And I learned and realized through this process with this group that that I want to be heard, and I want that to come out, and that it's not necessary to be anything else than what I am. I mean, I'm paraphrasing. This is, you know, this is the way I heard it in any case. And also, like, the kind of honesty, you know, like we went through this process for these 2 days, and there's an expectation that we come out like, you know, being all soft and open and everything is good and all of that, and that was, for many people, there was a feeling of transformation and growth and real learning. But also, you know, one of the participants said at the end, I feel like being here is a betrayal to my family. And for me, that was impressive because it's not easy to say that in the context, you know, in this context of people that are talking about how transformational this process is in this group and how these conversations has really helped them. And then to say, well, you know, I'm in a different place. That's not a small thing. So for me, that was another thing that really impressed me. That it just showed me that that the group was being real, and that this was not about kind of pretending to not smoothing things over. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole lot more that impressed me. Like, I could go on forever because people, you know, when we just stop and look inwards and have some stillness and time and space, like, you can see how intelligence and wisdom is a democratic phenomenon. It's not limited to one or a few people. It's the beauty of the human race. You know, it's that we're equal that way. We can all access those things. And I'm always put in my place by those processes. Like, you know, I come and I think I know something, and I'm going to show you how you do this work, and then all these people come with all these things that, you know, yeah, they show me that it's a birthright. And I was so impressed. I was just like, I was crying at the end. Maybe I'm just growing sentimental, but yeah, it was really beautiful. Well, there's different things that I've learned over time around facilitation, and one of them is to remain in I don't know, and you know, to remain in I don't know is in a way impossible, because I don't know is kind of our natural state. When I'm open, it's very clear I don't know, I don't have answers. And so I don't know is not something that you can create, or not something that I can create. It's a natural state. What I can do is I can bring my attention to the moments when I believe that I have the answer, or that I know where this should go, and they show up because I'll feel them as attention, like, oh, this is what needs to happen, and it's not happening, and I start fighting, you know, what's actually wanting to emerge, so or what's actually happening. So one of the things that that's a practice for me, is to bring my attention to those moments when I believe that I have the answer. Even now, like what I'm saying, this suggestion of a practice, I can only say, this is what I do, and it seems to be helpful for me, and who knows, ultimately. One of my favorite teachers is Byron Katie, and I've heard her say that those thoughts she has, the thoughts she has always end in a question mark. And I find that when that's the case, I'm a better facilitator, because I'm open. I'm not pushing, I'm not pulling, I'm really present. And also it's when that natural ability that we have as human beings comes through, because it's just unobstructed. So maybe that's one suggestion. I think anything that I could say about being a better facilitator is about understanding the self. So having a practice that uncovers the moments when I have an expectation, think something should be something other than it is, to understand my own triggers. So for example, anger. My conditioning is really to repress anger, and now I'm starting to surface it and see it more. But when I repress my anger, I will repress it in others. So I think one of the big things for facilitators is to do work around our repressions, to understand what am I repressing, and what are those repression commands. It's like there are thoughts that we don't see, like push it down, don't show your anger. They often have a utility to them. I push it down, don't show it, because otherwise they'll think I'm unenlightened. And to really have a look at those, and there's different ways to do that. I have my way, and there's different ways to do that, but to have some kind of practice around that. So that would be suggestion number 2, if there's going to be 3 of them. Here's one thing I also learned just through experience, and has really surprised me. In deep democracy processes, at the end of a conflict, there's always a stage in which you ask people, what hit home for you, and what insight does it give you about yourself? And there was a time where I found that oftentimes that phase was difficult, because people would start being defensive, and they wouldn't get their insight, or they'd slide back into the discussion or the conflict. And and then I would see Myrna Lewis, who created Deep Democracy. I would see her do that same process, and she would get to that last phase, and people would do it without needing a whole lot of help. They would come to those insights. And it puzzled me, because I didn't understand what she was doing differently. And then one day I just thought, maybe I need to give them more time. And it's almost too simple to, but it was such a huge thing. And time in the sense of silence. So when I started saying to people, we're going to reflect a little on what hit you and what's your insight, and then I would just leave a few minutes of complete silence, it was like that magically transformed the process. Suddenly people were coming with their own insights. They could do it themselves. They didn't need a whole lot of guidance, sometimes, but oftentimes they would just get there. And it was just like, it was day and night. It was a completely different world. And I couldn't believe that the difference was so big. It just taught me the value of silence. My personal process is to sit in silence and look at myself. And that's where real shift happens, like a real awareness can happen, which then affects my behavior, and that changes my life. So the ability to sit in silence with myself, and to sit in silence with a group, that's a big one for me.